Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Craig Hart. I am with Infinity Workforce Solutions. Welcome to the latest chapter of our Fast Forward Expert Roundtable events. This one today is focusing on International Roadcheck 2021 that is coming up May 4th through 6th. Joining me today is the immortal Mark Ray. Mark is like many of you. He has over 30 years experience as a trucking executive, most of those years with Frozen Food Express, a frozen food hauler out of Dallas, Texas, who I am sure many of you are familiar with. We are joined today by two members of CVSA, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. We have Christopher J. Turner and Officer Thomas Mrozinski. And they are going to help give us the rundown on what you all need to know so that your drivers are prepared for this upcoming event. Mark, it's always lovely to see you. How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic, and we really have an impressive experience, expertise. Mr. Turner, Officer Mrozinski, representing the CVSA, which is taking a leadership role in making our highways safe for the general public. But also, specifically, how can we improve the safety of our commercial vehicles out there? So we got a lot to cover today. I'm not going to speak a lot because Chris and Tom have got a lot of information to go over.
So Chris, Tom, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to be here. So for those of you who are joining us out in TV land, this is a participatory exercise. We know you have questions or will have questions that come up for our two speakers today. Some of you sent your questions in before this webinar ever started. So we want to make sure that you get the answers that you need so that you can inform your drivers correctly and so that they are operating the correct way. The easiest way to do that is through your chat window. And the chat window, for those of you unfamiliar with with Zoom rather, is click on more on your action bar, and then you will see a section for chat. Go ahead and click on that. And then once you open up chat at the bottom, you will see a to field, and that you can use to go ahead and click that to all panelists and attendees. And that way everybody can see your question, because if you have a question about something that we're going to discuss today, it is entirely, I almost guarantee it, someone else on this call today has that same question as well. So please, please, please make sure that you share that. Excellent. All right, to get us go ahead fired up on the chat. For those of you who got that open already, let us know who you are, what company you're with, and what part of the country you're from. So we'd love to hear from you. Looks like we got some folks chiming in from Wichita already, Chris, which is I know where you're living. Or in Topeka, rather,
Close.
Sorry.
It's Kansas, it's close.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, Chris, I will let you and Mo take it away.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you for so much for having both of us. I know I'm definitely excited to be here. Sorry, I may have to take some sips of a drink. We've had our CVSA workshop this week, and we've been going nonstop since Monday, and we'll continue on through into next week will be our board of directors meeting. So we've had a very full week. And excited really to finish my week off with this presentation. For CVSA, I'm the director of our enforcement data and judicial outreach. And my function at CVSA is to work with courts and prosecutors and law enforcement throughout the nation. I train them, work with them on different cases. For law enforcement, striving to get consistency. For prosecutors, making sure that if they have a citation or if there's some sort of charge as the result of a crash, or let me rephrase that, if there's a crash, that they make the correct charging decision, whether or not to charge someone with something they've done or not to, based on the facts, because this is difficult material, it's complicated, and it's very nuanced as well. I joke when I was the captain of the Kansas Highway Patrol and in charge of it for the state of Kansas, when folks would call and complain about the difficulty of the regulations, that's something law enforcement, we have the same feeling. talking about the standard Bible, right? I would liken it to that because everybody knows how thick that is and what the pages feel like and the font. Well, the commercial regulations, they're not one book, they're 7 roughly when we talk about hazmat and vehicle and safety and your compliance reviews and all those books put together. But the pages are bigger, and I joke that the font's smaller. So it's a lot of things that you have to try and learn and memorize and understand. So I think this is certainly, I've been doing it for 21 years, and I thank you for using the term expert. I certainly am not. There's stuff that I learn every day. The federal regulations change frequently enough that it's hard to make sure you have all that together. But that's one of the things we'll talk about today. So I'll go ahead and get started. If we can start with the first slide. Thank you. So, and I'll do my best not to read these to you, but just really to talk about it. And that's what I'd like today to be too, is really an open conversation. Got a lot of slides. It doesn't necessarily matter if we get to them all because we're going to touch on all of these subjects, but a little bit of background on CVSA. First of all, CVSA stands for the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. It was formed in the mid-'80s and started out with the Western states, and it has grown to encompass, as you can see there, all of North America, all of Canada, her territories and provinces, the US and her territories, and we're excited about Mexico. Mexico's been part of CVSA a while, but the SCT has been able recently to take a more active role and to make sure that cross-border is consistent in the enforcement actions that are taken. Talk about our vision when we talk about being recognized as the leader in commercial vehicle safety throughout North America. We believe that we are, and that's not because of CVSA, but that's because of our members, so many of whom are from manufacturers and trucking companies, shippers, all sorts of folks, including our jurisdictional members who make that possible. And our mission is really to improve commercial vehicle safety. We want folks to be safe. That's our number one goal. We want vehicles around the truck to be safe. We want the truck driver to be safe. They have families to go home to when their run is done, whether that's the end of every day or whatever their trip may be. And those are the most important things to us. And I say that's number one. Number 1A, that is, I can't even make my hands close enough together to show you how close these two are, but that's that goods and services and the livelihood of the trucking industry continue to move forward as positively as it can. Normal folks don't realize how big a part the trucking industry is of the GDP of the entire United States, but it's huge, it's critical. I think this last year, if it did anything, positive, and I think there were some positives we can take out of it. I'm closer to my family. Again, it reaffirmed where my priorities are in life, right? But it also was a great example of really showing folks how everything that you get from the store, Amazon's a great example, but everything you get from your grocery store, from Walmart, whatever your local retailer is, your local mom and pop store in your town, that gets there somehow on a truck. It has been on a truck. And the public is beginning to understand that. And I think the appreciation, respect, for commercial motor vehicle drivers has increased during this last year.
Amen to that. So
yeah, I hope it has for sure. It definitely has in the people I've talked to. So next slide, please. Thank you. So got to keep mine up with you. So we'll talk about a little bit what really makes up CVSA for a little bit more background. So everybody knows about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They're under the umbrella of the United States DOT, Department of Transportation, and the FMCSA promulgates rules that we either enforce or that I suppose if you're a member of the driving community are enforced upon you. So things that we have to comply with and work through, but also Federal Highway, PHMSA, and it's NTSB, TSA, the Department of Energy. And we have a lot of nuclear loads and hazardous materials that are transported as well. And then, as I've already mentioned, Canada, their government is and regulations are run by Transport Canada. And then in Mexico, it's the SCT, and that is their federal police. And they also do things with their National Guard as well. And then CVSA works with the United States Congress. We do that through our Governmental Affairs Office, and we keep track on anything that's moving through legislatively, whether it begins in the House or the Senate. We keep track of that legislative activity, and then we also comment on it, or we help those agencies comment or move forward. The new large truck crash causation factor study is a good example with that. We helped FMCSA prepare their testimony and talk about the facts and why that was so critical moving forward to make sure we did the right things roadside. We testify at hearings. That's usually going to be our jurisdictional members. I was lucky enough to get to do that. And I'm a kid from a small town in Kansas. I didn't ever figure I was going to be testifying in front of the U.S. Senate. So when I walked through that building, it really set something apart for me about, kind of the tradition and history of our country. So that was fantastic for me. And then most importantly, and something I definitely want to spend a couple minutes on, is that industry has a seat at the table. If we go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So when we talk about industry having a seat at the table, and I'll get to that in just a minute, but this slide really represents that and how critical and important it is for us. We have 71 Class 1 members, and a Class 1 member is the lead agency from Canada, the US, and Mexico. Now, Mexico, even though they're separated into the states, they're supported by just one representative, and that's the SCT. In the United States, that's every single state as the lead member, and then all of our US territories, same from Canada. Our local members, and this is something that's and another reason it's great that Tom's on the call with us. Our local members have become increasingly, much to our happiness, taking on a vital role within CVSA, because and FMCSA is recognizing this as well. When we talk about, I'll just give you an example, crashes worked, right? Your more significant fatals probably are worked by your lead agency, but your other fatals, injury crashes, a lot of property damage crashes, especially within city limits, are many times worked by your professional local agency. And those folks have the training and resources, and they document the crash, and they make sure that information is sent up to FMCSA. In many states, it's about a 50-50 split. Some states, especially on the East Coast, the really small states, they may take them all. But even Kansas, I think it's close to a 50-50 split, just as an example. So critical to have our local partners with it. And just to touch a little bit more on that, as you're traveling throughout the country on your trip, or your drivers are, the folks who work for you, if you're a motor carrier or shipper, then those folks may encounter local members, and they're fully certified and trained and professional, and just like a lead agency member maybe. Sometimes folks don't think that's the case, that locals are not certified to inspect trucks or certified to the same standard, but I can absolutely tell you they are. Tom will be on this call taking the technical questions. And why? Because he's a better inspector than I probably ever was. And he's dedicated his life to that and does it incredibly professionally.
Chris, there's a lot of confusion on that sometimes. I know in the state of Texas, state of Kansas, state of Illinois has their highway patrols, but city of Houston is certain, or city of Atlanta certainly has CMV components, and they are authorized and trained and available to do roadside inspections. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, do you want to take that about how that's set up in your state?
Sure. So with Texas, as Chris mentioned, all of the state lead agencies, commercial vehicle programs are in charge of that program for the state. Certain states do allow through their legislation, local legislation, to allow, whether it be a local municipality such as myself or some county agencies, depending on here in Texas, it's all based upon our city or county population, as well as obviously with the focus of travel on our southern border of the state, trucks coming in from Mexico. So those agencies are allowed to enter to an MOU with DPS. We operate under their umbrella, their guidelines, which obviously is sourced through what Chris has already mentioned with CVSA, FMCSA, et cetera. We have to maintain the same certifications that a state trooper would. We go through the same training with them in Austin. We have to pass the test and again maintain that certification. Not all of us are. For example, I'm certified in hazmat, both non-bulk, cargo tank, and other bulk. There are some other different levels. Not everybody may be certified in those areas, but for the most part, everybody is level 1, at least within Texas.
So the takeaway there for our folks on the call is there's probably some of you on there or on with us today that have had drivers that have not stopped for a vehicle inspection because it was not a state trooper and they did not perceive or understand that these other organizations, other law enforcement groups are certified to do these inspections. So that's something to be mindful of for those of you on the phone. It might behoove you, if you are operating in certain states, to find out which groups are participating so you can educate your drivers, because you don't want them to not be responsive to a City of Houston police officer that's trying to get them off to the side of the road to do an inspection.
Yeah, and I'll add to that real quick, Craig. We have, as Chris may go into it a little bit further with the Class 1 members, the states are broke up into regions. Not counting Region 5, which is in Canada, we have 20 states along with Texas across the United States that do allow their locals to enter into an MOU with their state lead agency to conduct commercial inspections.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom. That's exactly the point I was making. And I would make one other one. This is not, I would say this anytime, although I preface it now and before I didn't preface it because it's not intended to be a political statement. It's just intended to be how things should work roadside. When you see the lights come on behind you, turn on your turn signal, stop at the nearest place you can. That officer probably, I'm going to say 99% of the time, is turning on the lights with the anticipation that he knows where you're going to stop, and he's got that pre-planned in his or her head as they're pulling you over. But so for anybody that stops you, definitely local law enforcement is trained to the same level as a mixed-app lead agency when they're certified to inspect. But also on the side of the road, and we'll talk about some best practices and ways you can ask an officer questions roadside. But that's not the time to litigate the violation. It is the time to ask questions and get information from that officer. And I don't know an officer who wouldn't take the time unless they got to go somewhere else immediately to explain a violation, to show it to you if it's safe to do so. And that's a good cooperative relationship. And that's something we'll talk about here in another slide or two, but that'll work out and serve everyone well on the side of the road, I think. Our Class 4 members, you can see there, are federal members. And those are FMCSA that we talked about, NTSB, those federal agencies that also make up CVSA. And then our Class 3 associate members, and for this presentation, I saved the best for last. And I mean that with all sincerity, because when we go to change something in the out of service criteria, we don't do that in a vacuum. I don't think Tom is, but he might be, because some cops are an engineer on the side or a brake specialist or manufacturer. I know that I'm certainly not. So when we get to talking about brakes or gosh, we were talking about friction mats in vehicle this week, and I'm certainly no expert on friction mats, right? So we have to bring in that expertise from our associate members, and those are manufacturers, they're in the supply chain, they're motor carriers, they're drivers. It is an incredibly diverse group of people, which really help us at CVSA set that out of service criteria and set guidance to officers so they know what they're looking at. If it wasn't for some of the bulletins that CVSA puts out, especially when I was working the roadside, I just wouldn't have had any idea what I was looking at, and I wouldn't have made a good, consistent decision roadside. So that participation is absolutely invaluable. So next slide, please. As Tom mentioned, we do have our 5 regions. Region 5 is Canada. And then you can look at the other regions and see how your states are broken down if you want to look in there and take a peek at it. But really this breakdown is to show you that even within CVSA, we're large enough that when we're there, we break it down into each region. So that's designed that the regions can talk about things that have been successful when they've had reductions in crashes or any challenges they may be seeing. One of the complaints that we sometimes see from carriers is, gosh, I get a lot of speeding tickets in one location, or one state focuses on something different. We know in Colorado, they may, because of their terrain, may take more time, depending on where you're at, to focus on your brake systems. It just as an example. Or speeding, where you have someone coming down a hill, that gosh awful crash we had 2 years ago, I think, coming down from Colorado from the mountain where it hit a bunch of vehicles. So different things in different regions may be important, but they talk about it, and then we do all come together as one massive group as well to talk about those things. But that's the region breakdown. Next slide, please. And then our committees. So when I talk about not doing these things in a vacuum, we actually have grown over time and have broken ourselves down into these committees that you can see. Our Crash Data Investigation Standards Committee is our newest one. It talks about the best practices for an officer to investigate a crash, to determine what the causal factor of that crash was. We're working on consistent language and new policy statements, much like we have with the driver and vehicle inspections, to make sure that those are done consistently. Driver, and I'm not going to read through them all, but the different committees there that you can go through and be a part of if you want to be a member of CVSA, certainly not a plug for that. But in these different committees, this is where we discuss the different issues that are going on nationally. We talk about the new regulations that come out. We talk about the training that should be put forward, how to stay consistent, and then anything else. Go ahead. Oh, I thought we had a question. Sorry. Go ahead with the next slide, please.
Okay.
So get into just a little bit of the nuts and bolts about what CVSA actually does in all of these committees. So we have the roadside inspector certification program. And so that kind of goes along with the North American Standard Inspection Procedures and the North American Standard Training Program. So really those first three are what I'll talk about kind of grouped together. So CVSA developed all of the standardized training. We continue to develop the bulletins. We develop all the non-regulatory items. And what do I mean by that? Everything that's not a federal rule, we take the lead on, and FMCSA doesn't. We're certainly not enforcement, but we maintain the consistent training and provide all those bulletins after FMCSA. Well, let's say they kick out a regulation, we'll go back and update the bulletins, the PowerPoints, the training, work with FMCSA to make sure folks get that. So consistent enforcement is seen throughout the nation. And we know things aren't always consistent. That's one of the big things we hear, but I want to make sure that folks hear that we're trying to every day make sure that we are as consistent throughout North America as possible. That goes along with the training program. Those materials have been put together by CVSA and expert staff throughout the nation that are roadside inspectors go teach other inspectors and also help with recertification. We do have our CVSA decal program. That decal is designed that if you have a clean inspection, no critical vehicle inspection item, which we'll talk about in a minute, then you're eligible for a sticker, which is typically good for 3 months. We promulgate the, go ahead, Tom. Oh, we promulgate the out of service criteria for CVSA. We'll get into more detail on that as well. We do have our education outreach, which is really what we're doing today, right? So we have Roadcheck coming up, and we want to make sure we reach out to folks, and we have other programs. And then we also focus heavily on policy development for the future. So next slide, please.
Now on this slide, if I'd like to point out, Chris, just for our audience at home, I know a lot of you are going to start writing things down. We are going to be providing replays of this webinar, so don't feel like you have to break your hand to get everything, because he's going to be hitting you with a lot of information.
Yeah, and feel free to give this out too. So the critical vehicle inspection items, I talked about that on a previous slide when you're eligible for a CVSA decal if you don't have any defects in these. So there's sometimes some confusion in here. So we have our level 1 inspection program. Let's just talk about the full inspection. It's a 37-step standardized procedure. We standardize it just so we do have that consistency that we're supposed to do things in a certain way to make sure we don't miss items, and then we check them consistently. If the vehicle has no violations, obviously it's eligible for a sticker, but you could have a violation which is not out of service that would still result in that vehicle not receiving an inspection sticker if it is a critical inspection item, and that is this list of inspection items. It's the critical inspection list. Essentially, it's basically the things in subpart G that are checked on an annual inspection, typically, if you want to think of it that way, but this is the list. And so you could still have a clean inspection and not get a sticker. That can be very frustrating for folks roadside, and that generally shouldn't happen, but can certainly happen, especially a time like Roadcheck where maybe you run out of stickers because the inspections are going so well and you're giving so many of them out where you've just run out and you don't have the ability to get with a partner and give them out. But we do strive, our roadside folks strive very hard to make sure that they have those stickers available. And we want to make sure that we give those drivers credit for those clean inspections without any critical inspection violations. Next slide, please. So we've talked about this a little bit when we talk about making sure our highways are safe and striving for safety. So we want to remove those unsafe carriers and unsafe drivers and vehicles from the highways. We deal with the kind of lowest common denominator, where the folks who try not to abide by the regulations or don't do as good a job as they could, or, honestly, there are criminal enterprises out there too that happen to be in trucks, and we have to deal with those at the same time that we deal with amazing, professional, outstanding carriers that are the lion's share of who we talk to every day. But when Tom stops a vehicle, he may not know which one he's getting, right? So has to start out and make sure we do everything the same, make that determination, and then move on. And really, our goal is to make sure that, and I can't stress this enough, and I know I've said it several times, is to make sure that things are uniform throughout the nation. We also want to make sure that there's reciprocity between the jurisdictions, that what one jurisdiction accepts, another one does as well. Something that you may not know happens in the background when one state or jurisdiction, for example, extends an IRP waiver for registration because their system's down or they've had a critical event in the state. Or they need to get new tags out. Gosh, it could be anything. That bulletin goes out to all law enforcement jurisdictions. We put it on our website. We try and put those things where we can on our CVSA emergency declaration site, and that goes to making sure we enforce that uniformly or in a uniform manner, so that we don't write a citation that you weren't eligible for in your home state. We do want to make sure we direct our attention to the rules and regulations and make sure that's what we're following. For example, when somebody has an out of service violation, we do ask that they just double check the out of service every time, because that can change over time. Make sure it's not something they're remembering, but something they've gone back and seen. And they can also show that to the driver as well. To document violations that might be used in subsequent enforcement actions. So that's an important one. And this really goes to the point of, if it's not out of service and you do have a violation, the roadside inspection report talks about getting that violation fixed before the next time you're dispatched. So finish where you're headed, make sure you take the time to get that fixed, because, should something happen and you've had a brake issue, which you didn't have repaired, even if someone pulls out in front of you at a stop sign, if that brake ends up being a factor or set of brakes ends up being a factor in the crash and you had an opportunity to have it repaired and you didn't, gosh, that's going to create a world of issues that have to be dealt with. And if you just take the time to go ahead and repair that violation and deal with it, then that's something you don't have to worry about. And really, that goes back to bad carriers out there. And I want to use a great example, the New York limousine crash, also from about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, that killed 20 people. That was an example of where some brakes were not fixed on the limousine that should have been. That's public knowledge at this point. And the carrier tried to skirt around that, right? So 20 people died as a result of that crash for that motor carrier not being a good actor. And then finally, data collection, which is in large part what Roadcheck will be about. And that's to make sure we know what's going on out there. It's a snapshot in time, but it's also a reflection of the violations that to determine what we need to focus on and what we can steer not away from, but where we can really focus our attention to get the best result for safety.
Chris, I had a quick question. I know a sticker for a clean vehicle inspection is obviously a prize, but you also inspect the driver and some of the things he's doing. Is there any recognition of a driver getting a clean inspection on his or her issues?
We don't have a sticker for a driver per se. I saw in the chat that sometimes folks get stuff for clean inspections from their carriers. I've had that happen, and that's always great. I've never had a driver tell me that beforehand, but I have after the inspection was done, and that made both of us feel good when we walked away from that situation. CVSA does, though, recognize drivers much like your state associations do every year, where you have driver of the month, driver of the year. We also have an annual driver of the year where I think it's a $5,000 prize that we award for those drivers, and typically they tend to be folks who've been long in the tooth, right? Because the folks that have that 3 and 4 million miles of safe driving, so we do recognize them on a national level. Mo, do you have anything to add there for the driver?
No, not from a state level. I mean, one thing that I try and do, and I do this on a regular basis with drivers that you know, are just the standout guys. They're the ones that are going the extra mile. They're very polite and exchange good conversation during our enforcement campaign. You know, we're sitting on the side of the road. Much like in my profession, you know, it takes you know, 15 attaboys to get rid of one negative or one complaint that comes in. So I have prided myself over my career to try and reach out to these safety professionals that are in charge of the drivers that meet these, you know, my personal little criteria, I guess, if you will. And I try and acknowledge them by sending an email, you know, let them know that they do have a good quality person behind the wheel. It's not just somebody that is taking a job lightly, you know, et cetera. So, but nothing from a state or local, I guess, campaign level.
Next slide, please. Some of these I'm going to hustle through a little bit quicker so we make sure we get to the real meat and potatoes of it. But these are different inspection level types. We have level 1 through 8. 8 is not fully in place yet. That will be the electronic inspection. Our EIM committee, Enforcement and Industry Modernization, really is working hard to find ways that vehicles can still be inspected and not have to stop at a weigh station or maybe even roadside. Think of it like pre-pass or DriveWise or those different things you use now as an incentive-based model for folks to be safe and continue on down the road with their job and their destination. Next slide, please. The decal, so we've talked about this. I'll briefly brush up on it. Again, if it's not part of the critical inspection items, they are good for 90 days, and that's a combination of the color plus the corner that we cut off or tear off, and then we'll put that on the upper right placement of the window or on the trailer. Think the trailer's back left or right. One of the two. Mo, correct me here in a minute. But and then the idea is there that is to wave the vehicle on if you don't see an obvious inspection defect roadside, so that carrier gets to continue on without any concern. Next slide, please. All right. Quickly, I do want to spend a minute on this. Our out of service criteria about what it is. This causes confusion everywhere we go. So the out of service criteria. So there's nothing in here that that someone is responsible for roadside that is not in the federal regulations. This is all based upon the federal regulations. So what this is CVSA industry professionals that we talked about before. Let's use brakes, for example, when you have to have 20% amount on a vehicle and that's out of service. That's because manufacturers have told us, look, at 20% out, your increased likelihood of being in a crash because you don't have effective braking force or application, which results in a longer time to stop. And that critical event is likely to increase the severity and death in a crash. So that's going to be out of service. And certainly folks from CVSA didn't come up from that. That was industry manufacturers, the VMSS standards, and brake experts who told us those kind of things. That's just one example, but also obviously headlights at night. If you don't have any headlights on, something else. So many of these are common sense. Now, some of them are a little bit more difficult when we talk about working load limit for straps or chains or how things need to be attached to prevent movement. And all of these things are in or out of service criteria. Again, it is not a federal regulation. FMCSA does not put this out. CVSA does. It is incorporated by reference into the federal regulations. You'll have to search a little bit to find it, but it is there. And then states adopt this one of two ways. They adopt it first in a memorandum of understanding with CVSA, but then most states have adopted this either by reference or directly every year through their state regulations or their state law, one of the two. But it's a guideline. It's supposed to be when you reach a certain threshold of a violation, that is, I'll use the phrase imminent hazard. So imminently likely to result in serious injury, death, property damage, or to the environment and or folks after a crash. next slide there, and I'll pause for a second to see if we have any questions on the out of service criteria.
We do have questions coming in, but nothing on that yet. Actually, you might want to throw this question to you, Mo. Why do inspectors write warnings on RSIs when it really carries the same effect on our safety scores as a violation? Is there a criteria that you all use in determining one versus the other?
Nothing in writing, and Chris can add to this. Obviously, if the violation goes down, it's listed as a warning. The option to have that violation filed through a local, county, or state, level municipal or justice of peace court is certainly up to the individual officer. I'll tell you, with us, our program here locally is we typically do not write court citations unless it's something that does reach that out of service level. We feel like at that point, yes, it is a violation that is deemed critical, and therefore there should be some further action, that a driver and or carrier needs to take on the punitive side, because the violation should have been corrected prior to us seeing it. So nothing, again, I understand that they do carry the same point value, whether or not I write a court ticket or just leave it as a warning on the inspection, but obviously each violation is required to be listed. And Chris, you can add to that if you have anything.
Yeah, and I see the comment in the chat, and this is really a terminology problem. So this is an industry versus law enforcement terminology issue. So when we talk about warnings or citations, tickets, a warning means you don't have to go to court. A ticket means you do. So even though on an inspection report that is a violation, to Mo's point, I suppose it can get worse, even though the note says it's actually worse when you get a violation because you can't challenge it if it's a warning. If you have a violation on your inspection report, I don't care what it is, you can challenge that. Now, you may not win, but you might. And it's about 50% overturn rate. And that's one, because carriers are really making good challenges and know what they're doing right now. But it's still a really low percent of overall violations that are challenged. However, I do understand the point, though, that if you get it adjudicated, a citation at court, that has the definite effect of helping you out in your challenge. But the other way, it doesn't, right? But it's really a terminology issue. To us, that is a warning with, the famous air quotes there, and that it is not a citation, even though that it is on the inspection report. If we change our terminology, it is a violation that is or is not out of service on the inspection report. So that's one of those it's hard to get around, because we don't exactly have the precise words to describe that, and it's not a quick thing to describe. But yeah, they certainly do go against an SMS and are on a driver's PSB. But just remember, all of those can be challenged. This wasn't designed to be a data queue webinar, but we do have those. And if you have those issues with data queues, also I deal with those for CVSA, so does Kerry Burkowski. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions you may have. My information will be on the end of this. Feel free to make it a free-for-all. If you have a question about something, I will get your answer or get it to somebody who can get it for you at the end of this presentation. And data queues is a big one that is important to everybody.
And I'll add a little bit to that, just on the data queue side. Obviously, as Chris mentioned, that is the avenue to challenge that. Even if it is a court citation and it's adjudicated to your favor, then by all means, submit the data queue, have that removed from your profile, because that is an option that you have, even if it's listed as a warning. That's why I think it's incumbent upon us on the enforcement side, is to make sure we're doing good notes on the inspection, so that if a data queue does come in, we can support that by information that is on our inspection and or documentation, whether it be through video. We all wear body-worn cameras. I know when I'm crawling, a lot of times I have my camera on, so we're seeing these violations and capturing these on video or through photographs. So, and again, not on the data queue side, that could be a whole nother presentation that we could do. But I would encourage you to don't overload the data queue system. Obviously, with locals here in Texas, everything is filed through DPS. But reach out to the local inspectors. I would encourage any carrier or driver, if there's a legitimate concern, other than you just don't think it should be on there, call me. Call the local inspectors up. That information is available on those inspection reports to reach out by email or phone on the reports. So reach out to those inspectors and engage in those conversations. I would rather do it that way and go ahead and correct the inspection report through motor carrier in Austin and send it directly to you as a carrier rather than make you do the data key process.
And if you want to flip to the next slide, I think that really goes through it. And go ahead. I think there's 3 clicks. One more. There you go. It really goes to this, and it goes to the roadside conversation. Officers now are used to data queues. It used to be, I started this 20 some odd years ago, and when I'd call somebody or even received one in 2003, I think, by golly, I did that right. I know what I'm doing. But as I matured and as this program has matured over time, even the folks I called when eventually I was the captain of the program, I'd say we have a challenge. And they'd go, yeah, hey, do you need my video? Here's what I saw. I've got some pictures. And it would either be supported, or if I would come back to that officer and say, hey, we've made a mistake here, much more receptive to it than they were 20 years ago, because it's an established practice. And now offices are used to having that conversation, like Tom said. But here, really the partnerships are what saves lives. So if you have those questions, again, don't adjudicate it roadside, but take the time to say, hey, sir or ma'am, can you show me where that is? Or can, a lot of times I'd take somebody back to my car, print out the regulation, hand it to them, take the time to answer those questions as long as I was in a safe location. And that's not always the case. Maybe you don't want to be in their car, maybe they don't want you in theirs, just like you don't want an officer necessarily in the cab of your truck too, right? But my point is the same. Take the time to have the conversation with that officer. That respect should go both ways. They should be very respectful to you as a driver. And that's something we hope that comes back to us when we're doing the inspection. It's going to go great, much better than it would otherwise. And they are really likely to show you what's going on. And that's also a time when you might be able to show them, hey, this is what I think it is, and change their mind roadside, because we're not perfect on roadside. There's stuff we don't know. And so we're happy to engage in those conversations. So next slide, please. Definitely going to hustle a little bit here. So since the start of Roadcheck, more than 1.7 million roadside inspections. It is a 72-hour campaign, all of North America. Next slide, please. Talking about the history of it, just to give you a quick, brief snapshot. And the reason I used this, look at the yellow line. So that's what we're striving for over time. That out of service vehicle roadside, that was up, is actually, if we go back a little bit further, higher than 35%. So just imagine, a little under half of all vehicles we stopped had an out of service violation, 30 years ago. We're much better now. We still need to keep improving, but we're doing well. And you can see the driver out of service rate. We don't want to see it that high, but I would certainly argue that even at 5% rate, that's pretty darn good when you talk about the fact that there are some intentional folks out there who this isn't their job and they're just like, the heck with it. If they catch me, they catch me. It's a ticket, I'll pay it. So I would certainly argue that above that 5% is the 95% of folks out there who are doing it great every day and don't have those out of service rates. You're never going to get to zero, but that's always going to be what we strive to do. Next slide, please. Last year, we had to push our Roadcheck back from May and ended up being into September. And some of the information you'll see is from 2019 because, I think for all of us, 2020 is a year we would like to put behind us as quickly as possible. We do need to examine it though, because gosh, we saw speeds change, drivers become incredibly more aggressive. There are times I recently wished I had not retired and was still in my patrol car just to be able to take care of a few folks who did some stuff to me. And I know you've got drivers that feel that same way. And they keep their composure in a way that I don't think I could do when they talk about professional folks on the road. So there are some trends we hope do not continue for sure. But even last year with the reduced traffic on the roadways down overall by 16% for the year, and fatalities were actually down because of that overall. The fatality rate was not. And rate is what is important because when we talk about sheer numbers, we got to make sure that rate's down because as more vehicles and folks are on the roadways, we don't want to see any fatality, but we certainly want to see that rate going down because that makes everyone safer every day. Next slide, please. Just to give you a quick idea about the number of inspections we do. Last year we did 50,000. Typically we do 70. Here is a pretty good breakdown, although the numbers would be more. It is a breakdown of the different types of levels and numbers associated with that. That level 5 inspection is predominantly from Mexico because last year they didn't do driver inspections. They just did the level 5s. And then you can see the overall out of service rate. And again, if we're talking about 35% in in 91. That's also about the time seatbelt usage, I think, was around the 62% mark. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's close. Now we're near 90% seatbelt usage, and we're down to 20% vehicle out of service rate. We're going in the right direction. Next slide, please. The violations that we typically see. Just to give folks an idea, and this is why we focus on different systems in different years. But you can see brakes, tires, lights, cargo securement, and brake adjustment. And what you will find, and I didn't put it up here because it was just a lot for a slide presentation, but if you were to look at Canada's stuff side by side with the US, the top 5 are the exact same. A little bit different order, same top 5 violations. And the same with Mexico with their level 5, although their sample size was really small compared to the US and Mexico, they saw the same types of violations. And this is just to give you an idea out there. Hopefully you'll find this useful, not just because it's what we've seen historically, but these are definitely the systems coming into Roadcheck that you want to make sure are operating correctly so that you don't have the big orange sticker placed on the truck, rather you get the nice CVSA decal on the windshield if possible. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about the top driver violations. You can kind of ignore the other. I think we're going to strip that out next year to help clean that up a little bit. But other is a conglomeration of about 15 different violations. Some of them are state law and local that aren't really reflective. You know, your address not correct on your driver's license. That's not something we're worried about necessarily causing a crash. Some of them are, however, violations that are of a more critical nature, but we'll do our best to split that out. But as you can see, to the point of this year's enforcement, which will be hours of service and lighting, hours of service continues to be the #1 reason drivers are placed out of service. And it's our opportunity to remind drivers of what proper hours of service usage is, as well as retrain our folks. When we talk about being consistent, the other benefit for picking target areas every year for our enforcement is because we can retrain, and we do with our materials that we put out for those officers to refamiliarize themselves with a certain type of regulation, or this year the ELD, to make sure they are enforcing it correctly as well. All right, let's jump into to Roadcheck 2021 if we can. I want to make sure we have a little time for questions. So it is May 4th through 6th of this year. It is going to happen. We do look to have full participation. For those of you who have been around a while, it used to be in June. It was in June for 20 years. And our Roadcheck program meeting is a little bit like the, I don't know who was the person that sang it, Katy Perry maybe, I don't know, but it's hot and it's cold is the conversation. So in June, it's just about right in Canada in most places. In the US and the North, it's all right. In the southern states, it's hotter than can be and no fun at all. And now that we've added Mexico participating with road light inspections, June, they said, was a non-starter. So we're trying to find and see if May is a good option. And just to kind of promote the Roadcheck program, when we were in the meeting this week, we were talking just about that. And it wasn't just about it's too hot, it's too cold, I don't want to do it in sweltering conditions or freezing cold. But as we set those dates and look forward to next year, just as an example of how important having industry in the meeting was, we were looking at maybe the next week of whatever it was for 2023, I think, because we're set out for a couple of years, and industry was quick to jump up and say, whoa, hang on, that's the week right before Memorial Day, or you're touching Memorial Day weekend, and that is a huge delivery time for us. And they asked if we could move it back 1 week. Well, that's okay with us. You know, like we said, we want to promote and further industry, and we don't want to interfere with commerce, but at the same time, it's important we do the snapshot. So it's another example of collaboration being important, and where we make sure we listen to our industry partners to facilitate what we have to do as part of FMCSA's ask of us, but at the same time to work with inspectors, work with industry to make sure it's successful. So next slide, please. We do have our guidance that we put out. If you go to cvsa.org, and I think we're going to put that up in the chat, front facing to everyone, and you don't have to be a member of CVSA. If when you're on the website, I'm just making sure my instructions are correct, you'll go to our events tab, and when you're our events tab, our programs tab, you'll have the decal program, human trafficking, Operation Safe Driver, and then also Roadcheck. And within Roadcheck, you'll get and be able to see or download and use these materials and take a look at them for yourselves. They're free, they're public facing, and this is just an example of the guidance that we send out for folks to understand what's going to happen in the road check. So next slide, please. All right, so this year we're focusing on hours of service, and we're focusing on lighting. So let's start with out of service. And you can see I want to make sure I put the step that it is in our level 1 inspection procedure to give you an idea that this is our standardized 37-step procedure that officers are going through a level 1. And here's what they're going to check. So for the hours of service, that begins on step 10 of our procedure. And you can see there we talk about a paper or computer generated log. And these are still things that can be used by folks who are not required to have an ELD. For whatever reason, they are either meeting an exception or they're could be even under an emergency declaration, for things that are going on right now. So the first step is to see whether hours of service are applicable, what type of hours of service are applicable to that driver, and move forward from there. So I'm not going to read all of the things to you on the slide, but as you can see, we want to make sure that we collect that information, review the hours of service, ask the appropriate questions to the driver, give a driver an opportunity to make it current. If it isn't, of course, not current enough could result in an out of service violation rather than just a log not current. But those are the different things we look at to start. Next slide, please. So then we're going to move on to talking about the ELD and checking the ELD. We want to make sure, first of all, we need to know whether or not it needs an ELD, as we discussed. And then these are the things that we look at. We want to make sure that the information packet is there, user manual instructions, a sheet, a blank supply of rods to cover the minimum number of 8 days. And then this is the question that comes up a lot too. We want to check the record of duty status. And preferably if there's a co-driver and they're in the sleeper, we don't want to wake them up. We don't want to disturb them if at all possible. If for some reason it's necessary, we will, but our goal is not to disturb that driver's rest period, a co-driver's rest period. Next slide, please. So the ELD, and we'll get to best practices here toward the end, but we're going to ask the driver to transfer the rods. It's going to come into us through E-rods. They're going to provide him with a unique identifier. Tom has his unique identifier. Then when it goes through FMCSA server and their web service, you can see that it eventually is going to hit his in-car MDU so he can run it through the E-rods program and check and verify the hours of service. There is a USB stick. I don't know many, if any, jurisdictions that are taking that. I'm happy to be wrong, but that tends to be more of a cybersecurity issue. Plus, we don't want to have to necessarily be inserting USB sticks into each of our devices just for safety reasons. So definitely the preferred mechanism is the web service, but there might be some jurisdictions out there still using USB. Tom, did you have something there?
No, I was just going to add the USB. Most cities won't allow it because of our security restrictions.
Yeah, and that's pretty consistent across the US. So next slide, please. As they come in, thank you. As they come in, you'll see there's a kind of a look at what it may look like when the driver or officer is inspecting the hours of service. It's going to come in and they're going to check those hours of service for compliance with the regulations. They may also check the display of your device to check the hours of service as well. That's always another option. If something goofy is going on or connectivity is an issue, or it could even be connectivity for the officer in his car. Although yours is working great, his stuff isn't working. So he's still going to verify the hours of service, may do that on the ELD itself. Next slide, please. And we'll jump into lighting. Why lighting? Well, as you can see with the violations there in red, lighting still is a significant violation that we come across, and a significant violation that could lead to or contribute to that imminent hazard, right? A crash. If your lights aren't working when they're applicable, or it's not as visible as it should be, or for whatever reason. So let's move on to the second subject for our road check of 2021, and that's lighting. Next slide, please. So just an example of the different types of lighting that we're going to check that you're very familiar with. Obviously, the turn signals and lamps, headlights and their operation, ID, distance marker, license plate lights. And then the types of violations that we see. So we do still see a significant number of lighting violations. Of course, lights go out. We know that as inspectors, it happens. As a quick best practice where you can, if you have another light that you can change out in the vehicle itself with you, that is always a great thing to have. You may not be close to a place where you can run in and get one. It might not be at a truck stop. It might not be at a location where a store is available to you. Save you a little time, effort on calling somebody out to fix it, or even if you are placed out of service, it's a quick way to get back in service and moving back down the road. We do have a slide on ELD lights or ELD in a minute, so I'll save that for another slide. So next slide, please. To give you an idea where this is in our inspection procedure, for the rear of the vehicle, it is step number 21. You can see a picture of the roadside officer. That's pretty typical of how their directions are. The roadside officer will talk to you about what their individual directions are for you to check those lights. Again, they're going to be at the rear of the trailer or unit, I should say, and the front, and going to check all of those lights to make sure they're working correctly. Just as a quick note, you can see that ABS malfunction lamp. That's one that especially early on caused some problems. Is it working? Well, gosh, it's working right. I know it is, but how do we check it, right? Roadside. So CVSA has an inspection bulletin and procedures that can be given both to the driver and the officer can utilize, or inspector can utilize, to make sure that they don't write you a violation when there isn't one because they don't understand the system. Next slide, please. ELDs. We're not ELDs, LEDs, excuse me. There's no certain number of diodes. So it's going to be based on the distance. If you can see it from the required distance, regardless of how many diodes are out, then that light is functioning. Next slide. All right, best practices, and hopefully we have a little time for questions. For the driver, make sure that your ELD is functioning properly, that you have the 8 days of paper logs and you have the instructions. And the number one thing I would say that's not on here is make sure your driver knows if they have an ELD. That's one of the things we run into, that the driver is just not sure. And we've been doing this for a few years now, but we still run into it where the driver's not sure if it's an AOBRD, they're not sure if it's an ELD, and then they don't know how to use that ELD. So if you take the time to make sure the driver knows what they have and that they know how to use it on the front end, I know that takes a little bit of time to train folks up and get them onboarded, but that'll save so much time in the inspection process that it'll really reap your benefits on the back end of it if you have those inspections or going through those weigh stations. And so you don't have to worry about that out of service. I'm going to pause there. For sure. Mo, do you have any best practices that you would add in there?
No, I think you kind of hit on it. The big thing that we kind of discussed ahead of time was, again, drivers not knowing the functionality of the certain ELD that they're using, not even as simple as knowing where or if they even have an instructional sheet to get through that roadside. So, from a time-saving standpoint, obviously, if we're on the side of the road or in a parking lot, we wanted to ensure that your driver and whatever goods and product that you're hauling down the road gets back on the road. If we have to spend 20, 30 minutes of that, inspection time trying to help the driver figure out, number one, what system he has, and two, how to use it, how to upload stuff to web share or web service, and that's taking extra time on that inspection. So I think the big thing, like Chris said, spending the time, in front, training the drivers, letting them know how to use it, making sure that they know how to use it back to whoever's training them, and then knowing where those guidelines for the instructions and all that stuff are actually at in the cab of the truck.
And our inspectors do their best to be, knowledgeable about as many systems as they can be, but there's a lot of them out there. What we really count on is the driver being knowledgeable about the system that's in their truck, and that'll help everybody move along as quickly as possible. So next slide, please. For the vehicle, and this is really, just normal stuff that you'd think of. So road check for us, although it's data collection, it's also so important It gives us that snapshot. It's a reminder for carriers and drivers to get that annual inspection done to make sure all the critical inspection items are taken care of every year. You know, some carriers, that's when they do it, is right before Roadcheck. And other folks just make sure they train on it. But this is also really the time, and it's never appropriate to cut corners, but really the time though to focus on make sure you do that good pre-trip, make sure you do that good post-trip. And if you find that violation post-trip, document it, make sure that it's corrected before you're heading out the next day. And you're not going to have anything to worry about roadside. Roadside, you'll get stopped, may have the inspection, get the sticker, and everybody moves on with their day and has a good interaction. But really, those are the best tips, you know, including keeping a couple spare parts in your vehicle when you can and where you can to fix those smaller things that if possible, to keep you going down the road. Always a great practice. And officers oftentimes will stay right there behind you with their lights on, make sure that they keep you safe while you fix or modify whatever needs taken care of and get everybody back down the road safely. Really, I want to make sure there's time for questions. The next two slides are really about our out of service criteria and where to find them. They're in the presentation. It is available to you. We also have an application that's good on your phone, both an Android and an iPhone version. It's great because those are the same videos that we train our folks on. So if you ever want to know about a particular inspection item, then you can download this app. I think it's $24 off the cuff. I haven't checked the price in a while, but it really has a lot of information that hopefully you will find useful. Again, it's the same thing we train our folks on, and you can have that right in your hand roadside. And then the last slide is just my contact information. And I know we took up pretty much the full hour here, but I'm happy to stay as long as folks have questions.
And they do. Couple things just to dovetail before we get to the questions. So keep those coming. I know some of you have been very patient and have some in chat that we're going to get to. There may be questions that you have for Chris that you were not comfortable asking in chat, and that is fine as well. His email address is on the screen, so he has graciously made himself available to provide some guidance if there's something that you would like to ask him more privately. One of the reasons that we are doing this webinar now is because you have 3 weeks to prepare. And some of the things that Mo and Chris just shared in regards to the training elements, the best practices that you can do. So those are things that you can start assigning training out immediately to your team so that by the time we hit May 4th through 6th, they are up to speed on what they need to do to be able to make sure that this process is as smooth and painless as possible for you, for the truck, for the company, and for the officer. Couple things in the library. For those of you who take advantage of the Infinity Workforce System, we do already have content available in quite a few different areas. We have a big chunk of content on pre-trip inspection, including cargo securement. I know on one of the charts that Chris shared that cargo securement is one of the top 5 for violations. So these are great things to start factoring into training between now and the event, as well as hours of service training so that people understand how it works, because obviously these rules changed in September of last year. I want to make sure that everybody is up to speed with the current regulations. And then your ELDs. Now we do have some information on general ELDs. I know we also have some information specific to Omnitrax ELDs. The beauty is, regardless of the brand of ELD that you have, there is training material for that. And our system supports custom content, so that is an ideal piece of custom content that you can get out there. So I know when we had spoken in preparation for this, Mo was very particular. You know, if your people know how to be able to upload their rods to the E-Rod system, that is a huge, huge time saver for everyone involved. So I would think that that would be a critical item that you folks should make sure that your folks know how to do at a minimum. Excellent. All right. Now, question time. I'll start with Mark while I'm gathering my items together from the team. Mark, what do you got?
I don't have any questions. That was a lot of information. Hours of service, you know, being able to set the tone for a favorable inspection begins with, I have an ELD officer, and yes, sir, I know how to transfer my E-rods for you. That certainly sets the tone, I would think. The lights are pretty obvious. They need to work and they need to be operable. And I would guess I would just give a quick overview at how refreshing it is for professionals like Chris and Tom to be out there helping with the general safety of our commercial vehicles. So I can't thank you guys enough for what you do. And there's just so much information there. I'll open it up to a couple of questions. We're running close on time. It's Friday afternoon. Everybody's, of course, trucks run on the weekend, so we got to get ready for all that. So that's about my only observation.
All right. Well, I got a couple for you here. This one comes from Savannah. This actually arrived before the event even started. In regards to short haulers, I have a few interstate Florida drivers, and they are under the 16-hour exemption. According to what I understand, the split sleeper berth rules under the new regulation does not extend their 16 hours on duty. Am I correct? Chris, I think you wanted to take this one?
Yes, I believe that is correct. So there's no an extension to that 16 hours for the drivers in that circumstance. If for some reason somebody believes I'm incorrect on that, I'm happy to revisit and really double check it, but I do believe that is correct.
Awesome. And Bo, I've got one for you since you are out there in the field these days. When it comes to the instructions for an ELD device, is there a minimum amount or specific documents that you are looking for to satisfy that criteria? Because I know some of these ELD devices come with a small phone book of instructions.
Yeah, I think they're required to have a card, some snapshot of the general instructions, general uploading procedures through, although we used to take stuff via email, most agencies do not do that now. But how to upload the record of duty status to the web service so that we're able to go into the EROS portal and look at it. So just the general instructions on the instructional part of that.
Okay. Gotcha.
And those instructions can be part of the ELD software itself too.
Yes. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. All right, here.
Craig, those can go into the resource tab for Infinity System as well.
That is correct. For those of you using Infinity Workforce, that is something that can be exist on a resource tab, which is a piece of training or a reference item that a user can go back and revisit anytime they need to. So 24 hours a day. So that is a great item for that. All right, here, a couple other things, and some of these maybe skewing a little bit off topic of what we covered today. Had a question about CSA cell phone citations. They've had several drivers that have received these CSA cell phone citations, but the drivers do not receive an actual citation or fine, even though this comes back and dings the company's CSA score. And I guess was just trying to figure out why isn't there something to the drivers, something that with some teeth in it for the drivers, so that they behave better, because it looks lopsided right now that the drivers don't get the CSA score, don't get the fine.
So I'll jump in real quick, and Tom, you can take whatever you feel I missed or you want to add. So, this goes back to that ticket versus warning thing, and it's always a fine line. We want to write citations when it's appropriate and it's a driver's behavior. And I would certainly say in the case of a cell phone, that was a driver choice, right? So, in my view, generally a citation should be written. However, as Tom talked about, you have individual courts who may or may not prosecute it. You have individual policies, and there are officers out there, and I don't agree with it because of the conversation we're having, but I can't understand it where an officer says, "Gosh, I just wrote you a violation. You're going to get in trouble for your company anyway. I don't want to double down on you and write you a $300 ticket where you have to appear in court." Now, that is maybe contrary to the idea or premise we're talking about here, but that's sometimes an officer trying to have the heart in the right place, maybe not for the right reason, or maybe it is. That's I think an argument that folks can have, but that's why and how that happens. Or in some cases, you can have a situation where Their state law is a little goofy in how it relates to the federal law, even though the state should have adopted it per se. States can change that wording sometimes, and it can create an issue in court. So I don't know what you would add to that, Tom.
I think you covered it.
All right. Well, Tom, I got one for you now. This is from
Okay.
Bonnie Sedberry. Our company has gone electronic on our permits and registrations. Some inspectors at Scales have told our drivers that the permits must be paper and they will not look at the permits in Qualcomm. How should they respond or correct? Is that accurate?
So I would certainly start by saying, obviously check within those jurisdictions where that's occurring to see. I know here in Texas with our truck-specific annual permit, that is still required to be carried in a paper form when it is issued to a specific truck, unlike our non-specific annual permits, very similar. They can use an electronic version of that. Electronic permitting documentation, in fact, one of our things that we discussed this week during workshop was the implementation of Mexico's electronic CDLs. So they will have that electronically, or can have it. So that's coming. I certainly think FMCSA is looking at that. I think that's something that CVSA would probably support as well, because that's just keeping up with our technology resources. But from a specific location, I would recommend that carrier just reach out to that state area and just try and determine exactly what they're requiring in paper.
Gotcha. All right.
I was just going to add that much like when your medical certification went to your driver's license, the best recommendation is still keep the paper copy on you just in case.
Right.
So you just never know. States are doing their best to catch up, but wow, the trucking industry is a pillar, a bastion of being the leader really in technological advancements. And this is a good example of it, where states are trying to catch up, even though in this example, it may be a state issuing electronic credential. Other states are trying as hard as they can to catch up. But just as a good practice for now, if you can have a paper copy, it is still probably a best practice.
All right. Now, I know we dreaded this. We got a personal conveyance question. So Chris, this is on you. You got volunteered. For owner operators who are leased to a company, how should they log when they are off and using their truck for personal use? For example, hauling his horse to a trailer, or horse trailer to a horse show.
So off duty, not driving. It would be how you're going to record that. Sleeper berth is just for sleeper. So don't be putting stuff in there that's not when you're in your sleeper. Off duty, not driving. Now, FMCSA on their website, if you type in FMCSA and personal conveyance, it has some great examples of what we accept and some great examples that are not okay. So that is a great example of, okay, no problem. Throw that on your off duty, not driving. You're good to go. Just explain it to the officer when you're stopped roadside, or put the note in the ELD, or have the note for your paper log. An example of a bad one was a carrier coming into the United States from Canada, and I'll use it because nobody should be on the call that's this carrier, right? So they came into New York, and everything when they were in New York was personal conveyance. Okay, time out. That's not personal conveyance for that particular carrier. So we had to fix their understanding of how that personal conveyance issue worked. But the design behind the personal conveyance, and this is a tough one. We wish FMCSA would put some better restrictions on it, better goalposts on it, right? Yeah, so we know either it's a time limit or it's a mileage. It's set so folks know. The important part for us is that if you're done for the day and you want to get a movie, something to eat, I don't feel safe being unladen and leaving your trailer, that you have those opportunities. Or now it relieves where you were dropping your load off and they've said you can't park here, but you're out of hours, right? Give you the opportunity to get to a safe location to where you have food and somewhere where you can rest, feel safe, and everybody wants that. And that's appropriate under personal conveyance. But if it's something that looks like it's an attempt to further that load, if you're just talking about general guidelines, where you can get safe, officers aren't going to have a problem. If it looks like it's an attempt to further that load, now we're going to have some more questions for you.
Gotcha. All right, and now Mo, I got one more for you. We are a drive-away, tow-away operation and exempt from ELDs. As a motor carrier, are we required to provide instructions for the electronic software used on the driver's mobile device and a blank logbook? So I guess they're exempt from the ELD requirement. What sort of documentation do they need to be prepared to show? What kind of supporting blank information do they need to have available?
So first, as far as, yes, they would be exempt under the driveway tow operation, so they wouldn't have to comply with any of the electronic type instructions that would follow along with that ELD requirement. I think just the paper logs, their record of duty status, I don't know that they would certainly or would fall into another category where they would be exempt from record of duty status, period. But under the driveway towaway, they would be. So they could certainly comply with that if MCSA says that they can. We wouldn't, me personally, and I don't think enforcement would hold them accountable for an error or for not having something when they would be exempt from that regulation to begin with, if they're trying to comply with it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Awesome. All right, everyone. I think we got to most of the questions that came in, and wow, you covered a broad spectrum of information, which was great. If you do have additional questions, we have the contact information for Mark, Chris, and Mo on the screen right now, and please reach out to them. Their goal is to help us all be safe for everybody. That is the goal of everyone on this call.
You know,
So,
Craig, I can't miss this opportunity for everybody that's still on, represent thousands of drivers out there. If you're on chat, send a thank you to these two professionals that have openly shared this information, that are out there inspecting our drivers and our vehicles to make it a safe. Send a thank you. They need it.
And I'll add to that, Mark, if you will, just as Chris kind of opened up. We can't enjoy anything that we have sitting in front of us, around us, below us, anywhere that was not at some point put on a truck to be delivered. So we appreciate the trucking community, the drivers that want to do this, and the carriers that want to do this professionally. We need you out here. We want to work alongside of you and with you. And we all have one common goal, and that's safety for me, you, and those motoring public traveling with us. So we appreciate what you do as well.
excellent. Now, just looking ahead a little bit for everyone on the call. For those of you who may not be familiar with our platform, we are holding a virtual boot camp on the 12th of May from 12 to 4 p.m. Central Time, where we're going to dive into training, not just safety training, but how do you structure a training program? How does the Infinity Workforce platform work? So if you want to know more about this, this is something that is available to the public. You can register for this on our website. Lindsay, could we get the link for the registration for that at boot camp? Because Lindsay's also at boot camp with us. And something else that we're also offering, for those of you who are not familiar with Infinity Workforce, we do have a 30-day free trial available to our platform. And we can certainly provide you more details about that if that's something that you're interested in. So you can take advantage of our training platform, our library of hundreds and hundreds of courses. So you can assign training out for Roadcheck and get your people squared away. So I'm going to launch a quick poll on the screen right now. If that is something that you are interested in receiving more information, you can just click yes or no, and then we will further information along to you. We also have some questions on there about whether or not you need to speak any further with Chris or Mo, our two guest speakers today. I'll keep that up for a little bit longer. But otherwise, I know we are a little bit long on our time today, everyone, but I think it's been chock full of great information. We really appreciate you sticking with us. We want this to be a valuable experience for everyone. We want this to have a positive impact on how your drivers do. Coming up here in about 3 weeks. So May 4th through the 6th. And don't forget also, Work Zone Awareness Week is the week before that. So you guys have a busy docket of things to talk about with your folks to help them prepare.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for being on the call. Thank your drivers for us, and please stay safe out there.
Excellent. And Mo and Chris, thank you again so much. I think we're gonna have to bring you guys back because a lot of enthusiasm to talk about other things with you. So just when it's a little bit less crazy for you around your event. So
Data queue, yeah.
Yes.
We can do it. We can do a data queue, and if you like, just let me know.
That would be fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, it's now 2:50, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us all today. Be safe out there, and we'll see you again real soon.
All right,
Thank you all.